Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Very good, thanks. Very good.
Good. We have some questions for you, and then we'll move on, later on in the broadcast to the student Q&A. So are you happy for me to sort of move straight on to the questions?
I certainly am. Ready to go. Hello, everyone.
Thank you.
Whoever's there, I can't see anyone, so I'm just gonna say hi to the screen.
We're in a virtual world now, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly.
So firstly, so that the young people listening can learn more about you, please could you tell us about your career journey and your current role?
Okay, yes, thanks. Well, I'm going to be very honest about my age and start with that. So I'm 50. So it gives you a sense of how long careers are, considering probably your ages. And I think that's a really important point. I'll tell you a little bit about my career, but probably most importantly for anyone who's just about to start their career or is planning for it in the next year or so. Careers are very long. So when I think about my career, I won't go through all of the chapters, but I think of it in terms of chapters, right? This is a long story. And, if I think about, I've probably got 10 chapters, I would say, in my book. That doesn't mean necessarily jobs, but just 10 stages that I think have sort of made up my career. So if you're thinking about, you're about to start in a year or two or now or next year or whatever your career is, it's worth saying you're like the first few pages of the first chapter. And so, it's important to put it in some context, because I feel like, there's a lot of pressure sometimes to get it right. And I must know what I want to do, and I must have the right first job, and I must, don't put too much pressure on yourself, because there is lots of time to work out, where you want to go with your careers and see that evolve over time. So I've worked in advertising my whole career, and I won't go through necessarily job by job, because I think that'd be really boring. But I would say, like, if I was to evaluate the key themes of my career, I would say the things that come out for me is like, I've always tried new things. I've always sort of looked a little bit to the future of where things are going. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I won't amplify that, but just I've always tried to do the things that look like they're the new things coming. I've trusted my gut a lot. I've made quite a few decisions where just my instincts are telling me that I think this is going to be a good thing. And I haven't always been surrounded by people saying, yeah, you're making the right decision. Like I've sort of swum upstream, if you like, around a couple of decisions, but they were good decisions, because they were, they related to this idea of like what's coming rather than what's really important here and now today. And I think that sort of helped in terms of my actual career. So the thing with the advertising industry, it's like, as I've learned from talking to loads of schools with the Speakers for Schools program, it's a bit of a hidden industry, I'm afraid. And ironically, we need to do a much better job of advertising our industry of advertising. So, but there's lots and lots and lots of jobs across a whole array of skill sets within the advertising industry. And so I started in the media agency world. So very simply put, media agency is a business that sits between the advertiser themselves, so the people who want to advertise and have the money, and all the different places you can advertise, right? So that could be digital platforms, it could be radio, it could be newspapers, TV, whatever. Media agencies sit in between those and help those clients come up with plans and strategies. They help them make it happen. They help them negotiate the pricing. So they're really an intermediary for all the advertising spend that's out there in the world. So that was where I started. But that's a good example of where I started in TV. TV was, if you worked in the TV department of a media agency, that was where all the money was. That was where the biggest teams were. That's really, they were the people who ran the clients. But back in, and don't gasp, but back in 2000, someone came along and said, hey, we want to set up a team to do internet advertising, as they called it then. And I was like, I could see I was already starting to use the web a little bit, but at work, just to put in context, in 2000, at work we didn't have the internet on our computers and we didn't have email, right? So just gives you a little bit of sense of this is at work. It obviously existed, but it wasn't used at work. So it was becoming like I could see that it was something that had to grow. It had to grow. So I took that plunge. I got into internet advertising, digital advertising, and I started, like, there was 2 of us that started this thing, and obviously, it's gone on to be a massive, and it became a big part of the next sort of 10 years of my career. We then, the industry as a whole then went through a bit of an automation stage, and again, I set up a business within one of the big advertising agency holding companies, so one of the biggest companies in the space. And it was really about how automation of what we did started to come into play. So that was a revolution, let's call it. So without having to explain it all, a bit of a revolution in our industry. And again, I got in quite early on that. Then I had the great opportunity of making a change. So if the agency was in the middle, if you like, I then moved to the brand side, where I moved to Spotify. So I became what we call, working for a brand. And I ran, for most of you will know that Spotify have a premium tier and they have an ad-supported tier. And I ran all of the commercial sponsorship and ads on the ad-supported tier across Europe, Middle East and Africa. So that was a bit of a big shift for me, and got into digital audio. And that's also had the last few years a massive growth, as you'll have seen with how big all these companies have become, whether it's podcasting, audio books, just the music streaming itself. That was a revolution in music and audio. So was lucky enough to sort of ride that wave. And now I'm here at WACL, and I like to think that I'm trying to repeat history, and hopefully my decisions will be good ones. And we're focused on creator marketing, what we call creator marketing. Other people talk about influencer marketing. We think that's changed. Influencer marketing, I think, had a slightly kind of shallow perception. I think now, creators that are on the various platforms, obviously TikTok's driving at the moment, but the people on there, they're not just there sort of holding up products and going, isn't this brilliant, and then changing it every week. They are creators. They're making true creative content, or they're activists, or they're CEOs, or they're artists, or they've got some depth to what they do. And our job is to bring the world's biggest brands to work with these creators across all of those platforms. We also have a talent management business, so we actually manage talent that are on the platforms, mainly in the US at the moment, but I'm about to launch it in Europe, so that'll be an exciting thing for us. And yeah, so I'm hoping that we, creator marketing, as it seems to be, is going to also be a big shift for the advertising industry, moving away from all the big publishing houses and all the traditional ways we have consumed media. And I think I'm pretty sure that if I was, to ask this group, you'd all tell me you follow lots of people on these various platforms, and actually you enjoy getting content from them and information and so on. And that's really the revolution, hopefully, we're going on. So that is a long answer to that question.
No, that answer's wonderful, and it made me laugh a little when you mentioned not having sort of internet on your phone and how sort of the world of work.
Not on my phone. I didn't have it on my desktop. We didn't have email or no. I'm sorry. It's that I'm that old.
Well, that leads me quite nicely onto the second question. That was really, really interesting, and crazy to think, how times have changed. So thank you for giving us a really comprehensive sort of insight into your career journey. The next question we have is, please could you tell us about the use of technology in advertising?
Yeah, so that's a really kind of big question and covers so many different things. I mean, I think the first thing to say is, like, you know, technology to some extent or another has always been part of advertising, and but I think it's moved from, you know, a slightly more practical end of the scale to more about the execution and how we do it, and an integral part of what we do. So, you know, I think when we look back, we used to, so in the late 90s when I started, you know, when we ran TV campaigns, there was always technology. Like we used to log into something to get our ads delivered. We'd book them into a system, and the TV ad, that's how it appears on your TV screen. Like there's that kind of technology and infrastructure behind the scenes. I think with the advent of digital, that's when I would say digital advertising, that's when the technology, for better or for worse, some would argue both ways, but that's when technology really sort of became an integral part of everything we did. Because if you think about it, we went from advertising that was seeing an ad in a magazine or a newspaper or on TV, or listening to radio, or seeing it on an outdoor poster, where we didn't really know who anyone was who was watching it. We have ways of trying to measure that. We still do. If you work in the outdoor industry, you know, you will still have ways of saying how many people have seen an ad, but we didn't really have a way of connecting the ad to the individual. So digital advertising really changed all of that, and so then we started to go, okay, so you know, we sort of know who's watching this ad now, because we've got a way of putting a tag on their computer. So, you know, tagging, tracking, cookies, all these things that aren't necessarily that, you know, everyone is worried about privacy and tracking. And there's a lot going on in that space in terms of how it's changing. But that became the big, that's how everything changed, because we started to say, instead of saying, you know, okay, so if you're a 50-year-old man, you are going to like gardening, golf, sports, you know, we would work out like a profile of what a 50-year-old man was, which, you know, looking back, when you think how different people are, is kind of weird, but we would come up with what we thought this profile was. And then as an advertiser, you'd say, okay, so if I want to reach that person, I'm going to advertise in Golf Weekly and, you know, the Telegraph business section. And that's how we did it. We did it through trying to understand the people, but that wasn't that accurate. And really didn't say enough about the targeting was a bit too simplistic. So now, you know, the whole industry has been built on the fact that people now reveal so much about themselves as they surf around the web. Now, to start with, that was through, you know, what magazine sites you looked at, what newspaper sites you looked at, what you know, what was all these different websites we had, and we used to sort of basically tag you and say, okay, you've been to this site, this site, this site, this site, this site, and that tells us something about you, and therefore we will show you ads that we think are relevant. What happened then, though, was we had the advent of Google, and over time, Google and Facebook and YouTube. And so again, because I've been around so long, all of these companies launched, you know, we started advertising with them for the first time, you know, when they were tiny. Like Google had one person in London that I used to deal with to work with on advertising. They now have probably 20,000 people in London who work in advertising. So you can see how that sort of has scaled over time. But those platforms, they knew so much about us that they became the most effective place for advertisers to go, because Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all these companies, they could tell you so much about the person that they became very accurate at putting the right ad in front of the right person. And so that shifted, and to give you again some context, of all of the $500 billion a year that's spent on digital advertising, something like 85% of that goes to Google and Facebook. And everything else, every other site, every other place you see advertising gets the other 15%, right? So they have this huge monopoly, which is changing because TikTok is coming up fast. Amazon is coming up fast. So lots of other big tech platforms. But all of that tagging, tracking, understanding you was really where technology started to make a difference and allow advertisers to really understand who they were trying to reach, and then ultimately to deliver sales. I think now we're getting into other areas of technology that I think are, really exciting. So, Snap is a good example where they're really investing in augmented reality. I'm sure many of you have seen, you can try on shoes by just pointing the app at your feet, and it will pop the shoes on so you can just see them. They're doing whole outfits, so you can just you can see yourself in outfits. That's becoming a standard part of Snap, obviously very camera focused, and they're using augmented reality and virtual reality to help advertisers, people interact with advertisers' products. So that's becoming really exciting, and advertisers are starting to really see a use for that. The phones are so powerful now that it makes it easy to do that. And I guess, we couldn't talk about all this space without talking about the metaverse, which I don't know how much you talk about it as a thing at school, but the virtual worlds is a big topic, and it's all a bit crazy at the moment because it is at its earliest stage. But Facebook, now Meta, again, I don't know. It's funny, as an industry, when you're in the industry, you just talk about all this stuff. You don't know if anyone out in the world cares about this stuff. But Facebook rebranded as Meta, and the reason for doing that was their whole future they have banked on the metaverse and virtual worlds and all of that. So and when they make those huge decisions, then often millions of businesses are made off the back of that, and advertisers and brands try and do things. So you'll find that there are brands setting up shops in the virtual world, and there's lots of initiatives like that, which all sound a bit wacky at the moment. But I think we are going to get to a point where there is a lot more usage of that. So, technology is everywhere in advertising, and it can be at the very functional end, or it can be at the really creative end. And I think, so it's a thread that runs through everything we do. It just has different uses at different times.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much. And how has the way we use technology to influence advertising changed throughout the years? And I'm thinking specifically if you have any examples of this that we can share with the young people on the broadcast today.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I probably answered both your questions in one answer. So I think the biggest shift has been, which is we're now dealing with the other end of the spectrum, which is the biggest shift has been around how we track people. That's the number one biggest thing that has changed in advertising, is like, how do we decide what ads to put in front of what people? And I think, there's been a negative side to that, right? So many people will talk about, when I went onto a site and then I get followed around the web by that company, saying, why don't you buy? And you're like, I've already bought it, so why am I getting ads? There's that element of tracking has brought lots of great benefits. Because, going back to our targeting thing, if I was an advertiser of lawnmowers, and people on this call were getting that ad, it would, let's face it, would be a bit of a waste of time, waste of money for the advertiser. You wouldn't like seeing the ad, and you wouldn't care about the ad. So, targeting has helped try and get, the right ads in front of people. And I think, one thing I just want to kind of pause on and highlight to people is, like, if I ask, and I do ask this question normally when I go into schools and present, and I ask people, like, why is advertising important? I think a lot of people will tell me why it's important for the brand, right? They'll say, you can change perceptions, you can sell products, you can, all of those great stuff. But actually what most people miss and don't really think about is it actually pays for almost everything that we do on the web. So you don't have to. Okay, so if you think about your daily usage, you get email for free, you get all the social platforms for free, you can get content on different publishers and platforms for free. If advertising wasn't around, you'd be paying for all that, right? So I know loads of people use ad blockers and things like that. It's always important to understand that, like, the alternative to ads is subscription, and that is a trend as well. Like, a lot more people looking for you to subscribe to things. And so it's worth just bearing in mind that, like, advertising is a really important reason why you get all these things for free, because otherwise, why would they bother? Like, they'd just charge you for it. And so I think that targeting has added value to the ecosystem, so that brands can sell product and you can get things for free. That is the value exchange, and it varies by platform. So when I was at Spotify, effectively the ads allowed you to have free music if you wanted to listen to it in that context, as opposed to paying. So, it also opened up amazing opportunities for consuming free content. And in that case, also, hopefully paying artists as well. So I think advertising has really shifted from this very broad brushstroke, let's just throw our ads out, to much more specific targeted advertising, which, hopefully, will help everyone. And as I say, it's the next iterations now. It's like, how do we use these phones? Are so, it almost doesn't matter which one you've got. They're so powerful now that this use of augmented reality and virtual reality, and using phones as really the way to interact for brands, that is going to be something they use all the time. And you can think about anything. So if you go to a lot of if you were going to buy a car, for instance, a lot of the car companies now will allow you to, hold your phone at a blank space, and it'll have the car, it'll pop up in front of you like full size, and you can walk around it and you can look inside. And so, they're bringing the power of this technology to allow you to sort of experience things much more firsthand.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much. And as mentioned, sort of whilst introducing you, we spoke about the world of advertising and, what else you were doing to make it a little bit more diverse and inclusive. So I think moving on now is just, what exciting work are you doing to make advertising more diverse and inclusive?
Yeah, so let's start with a sort of big picture. The big picture is the last sort of 30, 40 years, 50 years of advertising. Everyone has looked like me, right? It's been run by people who look like me. Everyone in it has looked like me. We have absolutely not been a particularly diverse industry, and it's taken, as with many things, it's taken a long while, I think, for people to really wake up to that and to start dealing with it. So before I talk sort of specifically about me, I think it's important to talk about where we are as an industry and what we're doing. So, I think over the last 3 years, maybe, probably not much more than that, there has been a wave of change through our industry in terms of answering to, this issue of lack of diversity in the business. And so I'm really encouraged about where it's going. I don't think anyone would say anything is solved, but the steps have improved significantly. So, there are industry bodies now where, for instance, 700 chief executives of the major companies in our industry have signed up to a code of practice about how they need to shift their business. It's very public. Everyone knows who's on that list, and they're held accountable to that. So I think there's, like, at an industry level, there's an awful lot of stuff going on. There's some really incredible bodies. There's Media for All, there's Creative Equals. All the major industry trade bodies are all have it as a top priority for them. And so there's that kind of level of change. On top of that, the brands are the advertisers who ultimately have the money and therefore can influence people. They're tending to do a couple of things now, which I think is pretty powerful. So the first is, you know, the representation in advertising. Advertising is super powerful. You think about advertising, TV advertising, and so on. It is everywhere. So if that advertising is only showing, you know, white middle class families doing everything, then that's what, you know, that's the message the advertising industry is sending out. So that diversity in advertising, the representation in the ads, etc., is something that brands are now have changed significantly, I think. Again, still not perfect, and unfortunately, the truth is when brands do go, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was McDonald's or Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's, I think, had a Christmas ad with an entirely black family. That still gets, you know, reaction from people, which is, you know, pretty depressing. But it is what it is. That's the most important thing, is that brands like Sainsbury's are sort of standing up and going, no, we're gonna actually reflect society rather than, you know, how we've always done it. So there's change at that level creatively, I guess, and I'll come back to what we're doing at WACL in that space. And I think, you know, within as part of that, as hiring companies, whether you're the big media agencies or the publishers, the tech platforms, you know, their hiring practices have changed. And so, you know, an example is when I joined, and probably really for the next 10, 15 years, you always needed a degree to get a job. It was always like, you have to have a degree to get a job in advertising, on the whole, like the majority of those situations. And like that has shifted now, because people recognize that just asking for that, and sometimes asking for a certain level of degree, which is another layer of, you know, that was a filter in itself, right? And that stopped diversity at the very earliest stages. So what's, you know, and for anyone out there, I think it's really encouraging that there is, you know, this shift towards work placements, to internships, to different mechanisms to allow people to come in from, you know, not just through the traditional, oh, you must go to university and then you have to do this and do this. It's opened it up because everyone has recognized that that's one route to improve diversity. The other end is about the makeup of the teams, the senior teams, and making sure that senior teams are represented. And again, that is you have to, I did it at Spotify you have to make a concerted effort to make sure you're bringing diversity into your leadership teams and so on. And that's an important part. So that's happening. All of it, I would argue, could happen quicker, but it's a way more inclusive and accessible industry than it used to be. So they're all the industry stuff. I mean, when I think about WACL, I'll give you a great example because it's not what people always think about. So at WACL, we, as I said, we bring talent together with brands to do campaigns and ambassadorships and things like that. We've actually just bought my lights have just gone off. We've just bought a company called C Talent, which is a leading talent management business dedicated to deaf and disabled people, because that is actually one of the areas that never gets, it's definitely at the bottom of the list. You know, diversity started with women, and then it was sort of race, and then, you know, so it's kind of like disability was often the thing that was not focused on enough. So we have bought this company because we want to sort of champion that within the creator marketing space. We want to sort of really start the conversation in a serious way that, like, diversity and representation includes more than just gender or ethnic diversity, and so that's been a big step for us, and we have to change as a company as well how we do things and how we operate. But then on top of that, what we do, the great thing about what we do is we have the power of choice. So when we create lists of influencers, creators to work with brands, we can we will make sure that we bring a list of creators that is sort of representative of the population. And we have a platform with about 8,500 creators on, and they are all tagged, what we call, labeled, I think is maybe a better word. They're all labeled so that we understand exactly what their makeup is of whatever it may be, so that we can bring the right combination together for, you know, for the brands that we're working on. So there is so much going on out there in this space, and I think, you know, it's accelerating, and I think it's going to make the industry a better place. I think we, you know, within creator marketing and what we do here at WACL, I think we, you know, it's a lovely way to bring, you know, for us to be able to bring that diversity to brands, because there are, you know, just everyone can be a creator, right? There's probably got a few people maybe in the audience that have big followings and, you know, that are always putting content out there. Like there are no limitations to who can be a creator, and I think that makes our part of the industry probably the most accessible of all. You don't need qualifications, you don't need to have gone, you just need to have that sort of idea or creative streak, and you can create a great following.
Thank you, Marco. I found that all really interesting. And then finally, before we move on to the questions submitted from our young people watching the broadcast today, last question for you. What are your predictions for the future of your industry?
Right. Well, okay. Big question. I think it's some of it sort of, you know, follows on. It follows on nicely, and, you know, I think our industry is going to be one that is going to be, as we described, is definitely going to be more inclusive and accessible to more audiences, and more representative of what's going on in the world. I think the other thing we haven't talked about is that, you know, there's a big focus on sustainability of our industry as well, and what our impact is on the climate in terms of what we deliver and how we deliver it. Again, I would say early stages as many industries, but definitely, again, a focus. So I'd like to think in the future we can be proud of the progress we've made there. There's a lot of very smart people that are focused on that across the industry. I think I might be biased, but I think we're going to see a shift away from, you know, all our time and attention being taken up by big media companies, and, you know, and moving more towards our inspiration and our time being taken up by creators, and they become the media companies of the future. So, you know, whether it's niche communities of influence, or whether it's, you know, creators with 20 million followers or more, I think at the moment we estimate that something like 40% of our attention online is going towards creators and influencers in the younger generations. That's probably in the, you know, I don't know, 18 to 24 kind of category. But I expect to see that shift continue. And yeah, I think expect to use your phone more and have more kind of augmented reality type experiences where you don't even think about it anymore. It just stops. It stops becoming I think most of the tech platforms are going to find a way to do what Snap are doing and build it in naturally into their experiences, so that it becomes normal to, you know, have something presented in front of you as augmented reality for you to engage with in some shape or form. So I think those are probably the three areas that I think are going to change the most. And we're going to get tighter about tracking and tagging and privacy. All of those things are going to continue to tighten up. So all in all, I think it will be a better environment to experience, and I think a better industry to work in.
Thank you so much, Marco. We'll now move on to the students' Q&A. So if you're happy to answer a few more questions, I can jump right ahead.
Sure, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So the first one sent in is from a student from Heath Park in Wolverhampton, and they've asked, is a career in advertising as glamorous as it sounds?
Well, I'm going to Cannes next week, to the south of France, to work for a conference all week. So yeah, super glamorous. No, I think is it glamorous? It's not glamorous. I think that would be an exaggeration. It's fun. I think it's it's, if you compare advertising to being a lawyer or working in the city or some accountancy or some industry like that, it's way more fun. And doesn't mean it's not serious. It's just way more fun, and it is easier. It's an easier industry to be part of than those, because obviously you need lots and lots of training and credentials to get into those industries. So I would say it's more fun. I'd say it's creative. It's strategic, and depending on what part of the business you're in, yes, you can have opportunities to have a bit of glamour and go to different events. If you work in media agencies, for instance, and you're the ones who are sort of passing on money, is the best way of describing it, from the brands to some of these big media companies, they might take you out to a concert or to a football game, or maybe they'll take you somewhere to travel. So you can get little moments where it's like that. But I would say it's also hard work. Like it is an industry where you will work, and at different times it can get quite intense. Again, there's so many different jobs in this industry. There's no one job, so it totally varies on what you do. But it's definitely a fun industry that I don't think anyone I've met has regretted being part of it.
That's wonderful to hear. Moving on, we've got another question. This is a question from a young person at Hornchurch High School in Essex. And here they ask, do you have different methods of marketing or advertising for different market segments? So
yes, there's some big things where we always talk about in advertising. We often talk about verticals, and verticals are you have automotive or finance or travel. So you can look at the industry through the separate types of companies that you work with, and those industries have different ways of working and different ways of advertising. And so first of all, there's a little bit of a specialism in many companies around understanding, if you're going to go and talk to a car client, you need to understand a bit about what's important to them as businesses, because what will make a car client successful is going to be very different to what makes a Sainsbury's successful. So you have to understand those differences. It basically means you have to understand their businesses, right? Their industries, and what is important to them. And your advertising will reflect that, because it'll be different from that perspective. So that's definitely one way. I mean, the simplest way of looking at it is, what it boils down to always is that an advertiser will give us a brief. It might be for one campaign, it might be for a whole year's approach, but they'll give us a brief of some kind. One end, it might be creative, i.e., can you make an ad for us? The other end, it might be the media side, like, where should I put my money? But either way, it doesn't matter which one it is, they'll give us a brief. And our job as an industry and in the different companies is to come back to them with solutions as how we think they should best advertise to be able to answer that brief. So that's basically how it operates. So it does mean that there's differences, every campaign is different, but certainly different brands and different sectors have some similarities about how and what they do.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much, Marco. And I do believe this may be the last question. This is from a young person at Gordano School in Portishead. And they've asked, what does the daily schedule of a professional in advertising look like?
Chaos. Well, I mean, look, it depends. Again, it depends you know, someone like me, where I'm running teams and sort of representing, I guess, my business, your day is a sort of, it's full. That's the first thing to say. It's always full and it's always a bit all over the place, but it's made up of speaking to clients, probably most importantly, the people who are giving us money. So talking to our clients and our brands. It's dealing with the team. So, you know, I have to manage lots of people. So, you know, there's a lot of internal team people time spent. There's lots of things that, you know, fall under that. We are out in the world. So, we're talking, we're presenting, we're at conferences where, you know, we're talking about our subject matter. And you know, those are the three, to be honest, those are the three main buckets, and they all come at different times and they're all mixed in. And I think like now it's a bit easier because we were more sedentary, we're more, you know, we're in place more because we do more of these virtual things. Pre-pandemic, you know, when I was at Spotify, it was absolute crazy. I'd be running from one end of town to the other. I'd be flying to Italy for a day and coming back, and then so it was crazy. But you know, it's a full diary, and it's the thing I always sort of hold on to is I always make time to speak to my clients, because at the end of the day, they're the ones paying the bill. And so yeah, for me, that's the most important thing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marco, for answering the students' questions. I'm going to pass it back over to you for your closing comments. It's been absolutely wonderful listening to you. Oh,
well, thank you. Look, I think I'll just give you, you know, maybe just some very, very sort of top line advice. So, you know, careers are long, as I said at the start. And it's really important that, you know, you sort of recognize that early and don't put too much pressure on yourself. And just the main thing is to get going, right? The main thing is to start whatever you want to start. I think, you know, don't underestimate any experiences, work experiences you've had. So when you start talking to companies and so on, you know, make the most of any work experience. If you've worked in a cafe, if you've done a paper round, all of these things are not about the job themselves. It's about what it says about you. If you work in a cafe, that means you've experienced the public, you've experienced client service, you've experienced difficult customers, you've experienced, you know, being organized. That says more about you as a person. It doesn't matter what a job is. If I see a kid running around doing a paper round at 5:30 in the morning, I'm like, wow, you know, that means you're able to get up in the morning. You're out there, rain or shine, you know, so it says a lot about you. So, you know, use any work experiences at all that you've had, even if it's a day. Make sure you build that into how you talk to prospective employers. And I think in terms of behaviors, be curious, be prepared always, whether it's an interview, whether it's seeing a client, whatever it is, do your research, be prepared. Because you will, you know, get those basics right, because you will stand out from the crowd if you've truly done research. And what I always get from people is, you know, getting the first job or maybe a later job, but it's the most important thing in the world. I've got to get this job. It's so important, so important. And then you find that they haven't really put the same amount of effort into their preparation as they're sort of saying how important it is. So like, make sure your effort matches your desire for whatever you're going after. And I think once you're in jobs, you know, put your hand up, be curious, ask people questions, and always go that little bit extra to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and offering your help. And I promise you, you'll stand out from the crowd and go places.